Hello and welcome to the Nerd of Nazareth podcast. I am the Nerd of Nazareth, but if you want, you can call me Eric. And this is episode 1. This is it. We're getting started. I love it. And I've had this project in my mind for a really, really long time. And it's just now that I'm finally pulling the trigger on it. So I have some friends who are creative and who are writing and doing stuff. And it just got me so pumped. So I decided to do it, started an Instagram, started all this other stuff and just really been enjoying that and creating things and connecting with people. It's been awesome. But let's get down to what we're here for. We're here to explore pop culture, stories, movies, comics, games, books, and figure out what we can see from God in those things. And I think right off the bat, a lot of people are going to push back on that and say well, we have the Bible and that tells us about God. And that's very true. But the nature of Revelation is this: God is so big. God is so big, and his story is so all-encompassing that we're going to find it in fiction. We're going to find it in people's work. And the way I like to say it is this, that God's story is so big that it spills over into every other creative act that happens. So when humans make things, we can't help but to include God, just naturally speaking. And it's on that theory, on that conjecture, that I drive forward this idea of seeing God's truth in things that maybe weren't created just to show us God's truth. I think God's truth is so big that it just shows up. Now, every time someone makes a claim like that, you should really insist that they run it through the lens of Scripture. And so that's exactly what I'd like to do today. I'm going to read to you from Acts chapter 17. Don't worry, not a long passage here, but I'm going to give you a little bit of background. So Paul was preaching in Thessalonica, and some really militant, really hardcore Jews showed up and said, get out of here. And they threatened his life. And he was so afraid that he actually ran 500 kilometers, maybe not physically ran, but he fled 500 kilometers to the city of Athens in Greece. And when he gets to Athens, he's appalled. No pun intended. He's appalled at the idols that he sees all around, these statues to, every god you can imagine, and even to one that doesn't have a name, to the unknown God. And so Paul starts teaching them, like he does everywhere, about Jesus, about the resurrection. And the Athenians are kind of intrigued, and they're all thinkers. They were philosophers. And so they said, we want you to speak to the city council. We want to hear what you have to say about this God that you're teaching about, this foreign God, as they say. And so we pick up with Paul. So it says, then they took him to the high council of the city, and they said, come and tell us about this new teaching. You are saying some rather strange things, and we want to know what it's all about. It should be explained that all the Athenians, as well as the foreigners in Athens, seemed to spend their time discussing the latest ideas. So Paul, standing before the council, addressed them as follows: Men of Athens, I noticed that you are religious in every way, for I was walking along, I saw your many shrines, and one of your altars had this inscription on it: to an unknown God. This God, whom you worship without knowing, is the one I'm telling you about. He is the God who made the world and everything in it. Since he is the Lord of heaven and the earth, he doesn't live in man-made temples, and human hands can't serve his needs, for he has no needs. He himself gives life and breath to everything, and he satisfies every need. From one man he created all the nations throughout the whole earth. He decided beforehand that they should rise and fall, and he determined their boundaries. His purpose for the nations was to seek after God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him, though he is not far from any one of us. And this is where we really kick in here. This is what we need to see. Paul's arguing for the existence of God, and he says this: his purpose was for the nations to seek after God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him, though he is not far from any of us. For in him we live and move and exist. As some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. And since this is true, we shouldn't think of God as an idol designed by craftsmen from gold or silver or stone. And he goes on, he continues to argue, but for today's purpose, I want to say this. Our culture in the Athenians' culture is such that we worship an unknown God without even realizing it. He says it like we feel toward him. We try to get to him without even realizing it. And that's what I'm saying about pop culture. Pop culture is like an attempt from our society, an attempt to create the story, to recreate the story that God tells us. And we see it over and over and over again. And as I dive further into this project, you're going to see it too. But the time I spend writing and reading and just absorbing this sort of pop culture stuff, the time I spend doing that, it just becomes more and more obvious that God's story is so big that it spills out all over every story that human beings try to create. And so I think we're very justified in this way of thinking. And I'm going to say this. A lot of Christians don't believe that we should have anything to do with pop culture. I get that. You know, they say if it's not of God, then whatever. But I think Paul is showing us something here. And this is where that argument comes from. Paul says, in him we live and move and exist. And when he said that, he was quoting a Greek poet, Epimenides, their own pop culture. He was quoting it, and he quoted it just like that, right off the top of his head, which means that Paul had a keen understanding and awareness and familiarity with this pop culture reference that he was making. So much so that he was able to connect his own God-given truth in his heart, the real truth, through this false sort of created thing, this poet, and then deliver it to people who were searching for Jesus. And that is what I'm trying to do. I'm not nearly as skilled as Paul, but Paul quotes a Greek poet in this argument that he's making for the case of Jesus. But then he goes on and says, some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. And he's quoting another poet. He's quoting Aratus. And so these are like not just random poems. Think about it. They're writing about gods, little g's. They're writing about gods, and Paul is so familiar with their work that he's able to just sling it out there under duress in front of the high council of Athens. He's able to just pull them out and throw truth out at them with their own poets. And that's what I'm saying to you. These people were reaching for God through their art. And we see that today. Yeah, it's happening in Hollywood. Yeah, it's happening, wherever there's movies or books or comic books or any of that stuff being created, wherever a story is being written, somehow, some way, there is truth about God in that story. Somehow, it's there. And so that's what this project is all about. There is value in understanding our culture and pop culture, and it's stuff that I love, and I'm sure you clicked on this. It's called Nerd of Nazareth. You clicked on it. I'm sure you love it too. So why not be intentional? Why not be purposeful about the way that we consume these things? Now, that said, I think it's really important to put down some ground rules, and the first one is this. Out of respect for the creators, the creators, we have to just put this out there first. I am not at any point claiming that a person meant to say this, and this about God. Like when we talk about, the Avengers movies, I'm not saying that Kevin Feige or Marvel Studios or the Russo brothers or Marcus and McFeely or any of those people, any of the actors involved, I'm not saying that any of them were trying to convey biblical truth. Actually, what I'm saying is exactly the opposite. Without trying to, they automatically do convey biblical truth. Also, it's important that we are intentional about this. So instead of just consuming all this pop culture stuff without any regard for the effect that it has on our hearts, on our souls, on our relationship with God, we need to be intentional. Don't just go out and use this as a license to pick up new vices or to feed old vices or to embrace sin. That's not the point of this. The point of this has to be worshipful. It has to be, this is what I see about God in what I'm watching, in what I'm reading, in what I'm playing. This is what I see about God, and therefore, because I can see this truth about God, I'm going to live in this way, XYZ way. And it needs to be appropriate, and it needs to be worshipful. So the only example, the extreme example that I could think of, is, you wouldn't go watch pornography so that you could be a better lover to your spouse, right? I mean, that's You get it? So at the same time, we don't say like we're going to go watch all this pop culture stuff and none of it is building us up. None of it's edifying us. We're not intentional. We're not purposeful with it. And then say it's to help me be a better believer. It's to help me relate to God better. We wouldn't do that either. So let's put that ground rule down too. We need to be purposeful. So ground rule number 1, respect the creators by not superimposing and saying that this is the meaning that they said. It's not a commentary on what they are saying. It's a commentary on what we're reading. And then at the same time, let's be intentional. Let's not be sinful. Let's actually be worshipful in how we approach this subject. And then finally, no gatekeeping. Look, nerds are gatekeepers. Well, actually, right? I get that. I'm a nerd. I totally understand that. Sometimes you want to be a gatekeeper. Well, that's not true. That's not what it was. That's not how it's said. That's not what's meant there. Guys, don't be like that. And Christians, we're gatekeepers too. Let's be real clear about that. We're gatekeepers too. And sometimes we're gatekeepers on the right thing. Yes, there is one God. Yes, Jesus Christ is God. Yes, we should be gatekeepers on those things, on things that are hard and fast truths. But there are some things that we are dogmatic on. We create this tradition or this sort of external from the Bible, or maybe even pulled out of the Bible truth that we enforce on people. Guys, there's room for differences, and it's important that we know where the lines are. So don't be gatekeepers. Respect the creators, right? Be intentional about the way that we consume media, and don't be gatekeepers. I want to talk to you real quick about what my mission and vision is here. And again, it all grows out of this realization that God's story is so big that it spills over into every other creative work from human beings. Every creative work is going to tell us something about God. And so my mission here is, look, I want to reach people with this truth, whether that's people who are not yet Christians and they kind of come to this realization that like, oh, wow, Hollywood really is obsessed with Messiah figures. I wonder why that is. Or they come to this realization that, oh, not all Christians are going to, condemn me for enjoying pop culture and I don't have to give up everything I love in my life and live in a monastery or at the top of a pillar or be a monk or any of that stuff. Maybe it's that, or maybe it's reaching believers with this idea that, hey, guys, everything you do in this life, everything can be worshipful, and that includes your entertainment. That includes learning the truth and communicating the truth. So maybe it's that. I don't know for sure. But I want to say this. I want to empower every person that comes across this channel, every person that comes across my Instagram, every person that comes across this project, eventually a book, all of that stuff. I want to empower every one of you to know God better and to worship Him more. And there's nothing more that I could hope for than to even have one person at the end of all of this say, you know what? You helped me know God better. You helped me worship God more. And that's all I can ask for. That's all that I want. That's all that I want to see from this. Now, logistically speaking, I'm going to try for one episode a week, and it's basically going to be based on this is what I watched this week. Now, I have a 3-year-old son and a 2-year-old daughter, so some of the stuff I watch is going to be like Pixar, right, or Disney's Frozen. But some of the other stuff might be some of the classics, like Jurassic Park, right, and we're going to look at everything. I love Marvel movies, I love superheroes, I love all of that stuff, and I'm working on a lot of different avenues with this project. It's kind of a lot all at once. So if you have suggestions of something you want to hear about, if you are like, hey, you got to check this out, Eric, this is, what do you think of this? Where do I see God in this? Where's God in Breaking Bad? Come to me with those things and let's explore it together. Let's take a look. So I do just want to thank you guys for tuning in. Episode 1, it's in the books. Please like the video. Please subscribe to the channel. If you feel generous and you want to support us, I'm going to include the Give, Send, Go link to help get this book off the ground and really get us moving forward. Guys, I'm so excited for this project as we go forward. Remember, God's story is so big. Let's be careful about what part of it we're writing. I love you guys, and I'll talk to you again soon.